He was a boy who loved the smell of gunpowder before he even understood what courage meant. He had grown up in a neighborhood where dreams were often small, where life taught you to settle before you tried to soar. But from the moment he first held a toy gun and imagined himself protecting and defending, he had wanted more. He wanted to test himself, to feel the weight of responsibility, to see how far his skills could take him. Shooting wasn't just a hobby. It was a calling, something that made him feel alive in a world that often tried to quiet him. Every afternoon, after finishing his homework and chores, he would wander to the edge of town, where a small practice range sat tucked between trees. It wasn't much, a few worn targets and old rifles that belonged to the community center, but it was enough. Enough for him to learn the basics, enough for him to dream. He spent hours there, adjusting his grip, practicing his aim, and imagining a life where his name meant something, where people noticed what he could do. One day, a flyer arrived at his house. It was about a shooting demonstration at a nearby military training facility. The event promised a chance to try shooting under supervision. His heart leapt when he saw it. This wasn't just another day at the practice range. This was a real chance to show that his skills mattered. He begged his mother to take him, and after much pleading, she agreed. She knew how much it meant to him, and she hoped this small opportunity might spark something good. On the day of the event, he dressed neatly, trying to look confident even though his heart was pounding. He walked into the military facility and looked around, wide-eyed. The place smelled of polished metal and discipline. Soldiers in crisp uniforms moved quickly, their faces serious and sharp. He felt small and out of place, but he held his head high. He had worked too long, practiced too much, and dreamed too vividly to let fear stop him now. He finally approached the officer in charge of the demonstration. A tall man with medals pinned across his chest looked down at him. The boy swallowed his nerves and spoke, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sir, may I try shooting?" he asked politely, his hands fidgeting slightly. The officer's eyes narrowed and a laugh escaped him. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a mocking, dismissive laugh that seemed to echo across the training ground. "You, a boy like you? Do you even know how to hold a gun properly?" His tone was sharp, almost cruel. Around him, a few soldiers smirked, glancing at the boy as if he were a curious, silly child. The boy felt heat rise to his face. Shame, embarrassment, anger, all of it mixed together. He had faced teasing before, but this felt different. This man, this colonel, had the power to make his dream seem ridiculous with a single word. And yet, as the laughter washed over him, something deep inside stirred. It wasn't the kind of anger that would lash out recklessly. It was quieter, sharper, a determination that he had never felt so strongly before. He nodded slowly, trying to hide his disappointment. I understand, sir," he said, his voice small but firm. He stepped back, but he didn't leave, not yet. He stayed to watch, to learn, to absorb every movement, every word, every technique he could see. He studied how the soldiers handled the guns, how they moved with precision, how they listened and acted without hesitation. Every detail was a lesson, every gesture a story of discipline and skill he wanted to master. As he watched, he realized something important. This was more than just about shooting. It was about respect, about earning a place where people took him seriously. The laughter of the colonel, though harsh, had lit a fire within him. He would not let that mockery define him. He would work, practice, and grow stronger until he was no longer a boy who could be dismissed. He would become someone who demanded recognition not through words but through action. In the weeks after the demonstration, he returned to the practice range with renewed purpose. Every day became a small battle against his own limitations. He woke early to practice before school, and after classes he trained even harder. His fingers grew steady, his breath controlled, his aim precise. He made notes about his progress, noting what worked and what didn't, thinking always about that day at the military facility, and the man who had laughed. Even at home, he found ways to improve. He studied military tactics, read about great marksmen, and watched videos of elite soldiers. The world of the SEALs, once distant and abstract, started to feel reachable. Every story of courage and skill became a stepping stone for him. He learned that discipline was as much about the mind as it was about the body. He repeated drills, memorized strategies, and imagined himself not just surviving but excelling. He also faced moments of doubt. Some days, the ridicule of the colonel returned in his thoughts. whispering that he would never be good enough, that the world wasn't ready for someone like him. He remembered the laughter, felt the sting again, and sometimes wanted to give up. But he never did. He learned to turn that doubt into fuel. Every time he felt small, he reminded himself why he started. Every time he felt discouraged, he visualized the day he would prove himself not just to the colonel, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. His friends at school noticed the change in him. He was quieter, more focused, more serious about his goals. Some teased him for being so intense, for spending so much time at the range instead of hanging out. But he didn't mind. He understood that greatness often required sacrifice, and he was ready to pay it. The small victories he achieved on the range were more important to him than any approval from peers. Each time he hit a target perfectly, each time his aim improved, he felt a surge of pride that no teasing could erase. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he practiced alone at the edge of town. The range was empty, silent except for the soft whine of the wind and the occasional crack of a bullet hitting the target. He aimed carefully, breath steady, eyes fixed on the center of the target. He remembered the colonel's laugh, the way the world had seemed to close around him in that moment. And then with a deep exhale he fired. The bullet hit exactly where he intended. He smiled, a small private victory knowing that this was just the beginning. From that day his ambition grew sharper. He didn't just want to be good. He wanted to be the best. He wanted to achieve what others thought impossible, to rise above mockery and doubt, to show that skill, determination, and courage could overcome prejudice and underestimation. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. It would demand years of training, sacrifices, and relentless effort. But he also knew that the fire inside him would not be extinguished, that every challenge would only make him stronger. And so, the boy who had once been laughed at began a journey that would take him far beyond the practice range, far beyond the whispers of doubt. The spark that had been ignited that day at the military facility became a flame that would guide him, shaping his dreams and his destiny. He was no longer just a boy who wanted to shoot. He was a young man determined to carve his place in a world that had once refused to see him. Every day he trained harder. Every night he dreamed bigger. And in the quiet moments when the targets lay still and the world seemed calm, he whispered to himself a promise. One day, he would return, not as a boy asking permission, but as a master who could not be ignored, whose skills would speak louder than any laugh, whose achievements would shatter every expectation that the boy had grown into a young man now. But his fire had not dimmed. If anything, it burned brighter. Every day at the practice range had sharpened his skills, but he knew that to reach the level of the elite, he would need more than natural talent. He needed discipline, focus, and a mind that refused to give in to fear or doubt. Every early morning and late evening he spent with his rifles. Every sleepless night reading about tactics and strategies was a step toward the future he had imagined ever since the colonel had laughed at him. Life, however, had a way of testing his resolve. Resources were limited, and access to the kind of professional training he dreamed of was almost impossible. Equipment was old, targets were worn, and many times he had to improvise. But instead of letting frustration overwhelm him, he used it as a reason to work harder. He learned to fix his own rifles, to clean and maintain them meticulously, to understand every mechanism until it became second nature. Every obstacle became a lesson, every limitation a new challenge to overcome. Some days the world seemed against him. People doubted him, questioned his dedication, or dismissed his dreams as childish fantasies. Teachers told him to focus on practical paths. Friends teased him for spending so much time on shooting instead of socializing, and strangers often assumed he wasn't capable of anything beyond his neighborhood. He could have let their words destroy him, but he remembered the colonel's mocking laugh, and instead of discouragement, he felt determination. He refused to let other people define his limits. He also discovered mentors along the way. Older shooters, retired military officers, and even some local coaches noticed his talent. They offered guidance when he asked, subtle tips that refined his aim, advice on mental preparation, and stories about their own struggles. One retired soldier took a particular interest, teaching him how to stay calm under pressure, how to focus even when everything around him seemed chaotic, and how precision was often more important than speed. The young man listened, intently absorbing every lesson, knowing that each word was a brick in the foundation of his future. Training became his life. He ran for hours to build endurance, practiced swimming to strengthen his body, and spent countless hours at the shooting range perfecting his aim. But it wasn't just physical. He studied the psychology of elite shooters and soldiers, learning how focus and patience could turn an average person into a master. He meditated to clear his mind, practiced breathing techniques to steady his hands, and visualized scenarios where he would have to act decisively under pressure. Every day he felt himself becoming sharper, stronger, more capable. There were moments when frustration crept in. Sometimes, despite hours of practice, a shot would miss, or his calculations would be slightly off. On those days he could feel doubt creeping into his mind, whispering that maybe the colonel had been right, that he wasn't ready, that he would never reach the level of the elite. But he learned to recognize these thoughts and let them pass without taking hold. He reminded himself of every small victory he had achieved, every target hit perfectly, every skill mastered. Slowly he began to see that setbacks were not failures. They were opportunities to grow stronger. He also faced moments of isolation. His dedication required sacrifices. Parties, outings, and casual friendships often fell away because he simply didn't have time for them. But he didn't mind. His focus was on something larger, something more important than temporary pleasure. He found companionship in the few mentors who believed in him and in the discipline he had cultivated. In the quiet moments when the world seemed to sleep, he would practice alone under the stars, imagining himself standing tall in front of the colonel one day, not as a boy asking permission, but as someone who had earned his place. Over time, the young man began to notice subtle changes in himself. His hands, once unsteady, were now firm and precise. His eyes could track a moving target with accuracy that seemed almost effortless. His mind, once distracted by doubt or distraction, now focused on the smallest details, seeing patterns others missed. Confidence replaced fear, and quiet determination replaced the embarrassment of his earlier years. He felt ready to take the next step, to aim for something truly extraordinary. In the midst of this preparation, he never lost sight of the lessons learned from mockery. The colonel's laughter had taught him that talent alone was not enough. Recognition came not from asking for permission, but from proving oneself through action. He internalized this lesson every day, letting it guide him as he set increasingly difficult goals. He started challenging himself with targets that were farther, smaller, and more complicated. He timed his drills, recorded results, and reviewed every mistake. His progress was steady but deliberate, like a river carving its way through stone. He also began to study the path of elite soldiers. He read about the Navy SEALs, learning their history, their values, and their training routines. He discovered stories of perseverance, resilience, and courage, and each story inspired him to push harder. He imagined himself undergoing the same grueling tests, enduring the same hardships, and emerging stronger. The dream that had once seemed distant now felt tangible, something that he could reach if he continued to dedicate himself fully. During this time, his family became a quiet source of support. They didn't always understand his obsession with shooting or his desire to join the military, but they respected his determination. His mother would watch him practice from a distance, sometimes offering small words of encouragement, while his father, though quiet, would nod in acknowledgement of his progress. Their belief, though subtle, gave him strength, reminding him that he wasn't alone in his journey. Despite all this, the young man never allowed pride to take over. He remained humble, knowing that skill was earned, not given. He watched and learned from everyone, from novices to experts, understanding that there was always something new to master. He embraced every challenge, every failure, and every lesson as part of the journey. His dedication was not just to skill, but to becoming a person who could handle responsibility, pressure, and the expectations that came with greatness. As the years went by, his progress became noticeable. Local competitions began to recognize him. He won small awards, set minor records, and earned respect from peers who had once doubted him. Each achievement was a step toward the larger goal, a confirmation that his efforts were not wasted. But even as he celebrated these victories, he knew that they were only preparation for the true challenge, the moment when he would test himself against the best, when he would step into a world of elite soldiers and prove that he belonged. One day, he received news of a regional competition where elite shooters, including those with military experience, would participate. This was his chance to measure himself against the best, to see how far his training had taken him. He approached it with seriousness, knowing that victory was not guaranteed but understanding that the effort itself was part of the journey. For weeks leading up to it, he intensified his preparation. He trained longer, pushed harder, and visualized every scenario he might face. Every bullet he fired, every calculation he made was with purpose. When the day of the competition arrived, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The venue was filled with experienced shooters, some in uniform, others with years of practice and accolades behind them. The young man took a deep breath, remembering the lessons of the past: discipline, focus, humility, and determination. He reminded himself that he was ready, that every day of preparation had brought him to this moment, and that he would not be intimidated by anyone. As he stepped forward to begin, he felt a familiar clarity settle over him. The noise of the crowd, the chatter of competitors, and the weight of expectation faded into the background. All that mattered was the target, the rifle in his hands, and the skills he had honed over countless hours. With each shot, he felt his confidence grow. Each bullet that hit the center of the target was a small victory, a confirmation that his path of preparation was working. By the end of the competition, it became clear that he had exceeded expectations. Experienced shooters and military veterans alike looked at him with surprise and respect. Though he didn't yet know it, this was a turning point. He had taken the first major step from a boy who had been mocked to a young man on the verge of greatness. The recognition was gratifying, but more importantly, it reinforced his belief in the power of preparation, perseverance, and focus. After the competition, he reflected quietly on his journey. He remembered the laughter of the colonel, the obstacles he had faced, and the countless hours of practice. He realized that every hardship had shaped him, every failure had taught him, and every small victory had built the foundation for what was to come. He was no longer the boy asking to shoot. He was a young man proving that talent, when combined with determination, could overcome any doubt or mockery. And so he continued. The young man knew that his journey had only begun. The path to the elite, to the Navy SEALs, and to breaking records was still ahead. But now he walked it with purpose, skill, and confidence. Every day of training, every challenge faced, and every lesson learned brought him closer to the moment when he would stand at the top, not as someone who had been laughed at, but as someone who had earned the right to be there. 6 had ever been set for him. The young man had worked for years to reach this point. The skills he had honed, the hours of practice, the sacrifices, all led to this moment. He had been accepted into one of the most demanding training programs in the military, a path known for testing the limits of anyone brave enough to walk it. The moment he stepped onto the training grounds, he could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him, but it didn't shake him. Instead, it fueled the determination that had carried him through years of preparation. The training camp was unlike anything he had ever experienced. From the first day, it demanded everything: endurance, strength, precision, mental toughness. Recruits ran before sunrise, swam in cold, choppy waters, and climbed obstacles that seemed impossible. They were pushed beyond what they thought were their limits, and the young man felt it in every muscle, every joint, every part of his being. Yet for the first time in his life, he felt alive in a new way. Every challenge was an opportunity to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself. The instructors were relentless. They scrutinized every move, every decision, every reaction. Mistakes were met with immediate correction, sometimes harshly. The young man quickly learned that in this world, hesitation could cost more than pride. It could cost success and sometimes safety. Each drill, each exercise was designed to test not just the body but the mind. The physical pain was one thing. The mental exhaustion, the constant pressure was another. Yet he thrived. Where others faltered under stress, he drew on the years of preparation that had taught him focus and resilience. He quickly discovered that the hardest part wasn't just the training itself, but the competition within the group. The other recruits were talented, driven, and often aggressive in their pursuit of excellence. Rivalries formed naturally, fueled by the pressure to be the best. He was challenged in every drill, every obstacle course, every shooting test. At first, he questioned whether he belonged, whether his years of practice were enough to match the experience and raw talent around him. But each time doubt arose, he remembered the laughter of the colonel from years before. He would not let that define him. He would push through. Shooting drills became his sanctuary. While his peers struggled with nerves and stress, he found clarity when he held a rifle. His hands were steady, his focus absolute. He could feel the difference between a rushed shot and a calculated one, and he knew how to adjust for wind, movement, and distance. The instructors began to notice. Comments that were once neutral became impressed observations. "Keep your calm," one instructor said during a particularly challenging shooting exercise. "You're more precise than most here." That quiet acknowledgement, small as it was, strengthened him more than praise ever could. Swimming tests were another challenge. The waters were icy, the current strong, and the drills seemed endless. Many recruits struggled with exhaustion, but the young man had spent years building endurance. He had practiced swimming in difficult conditions, and he knew how to control his breathing, pace himself, and conserve energy. By the end of each exercise, when others were gasping and shivering, he emerged steady, focused, and ready for the next test. The instructors began to notice not just his skill, but his composure under pressure, a trait far more valuable than raw strength. Obstacle courses were designed to break the body and challenge the mind. Walls too high to scale, ropes that burned the hands, tunnels that tested courage, and courses that seemed endless. Every muscle in his body ached, yet he learned to move with purpose, to think strategically, to use technique over brute force. He observed other recruits, learning from their mistakes, adapting quickly. Each completed course became a small victory, proof that preparation, observation, and persistence were as important as sheer physical ability. The most grueling part of all, however, was the mental pressure. Instructors created scenarios designed to simulate combat stress, sudden alarms, confusing instructions, obstacles in unexpected order. Many recruits faltered, making mistakes that seemed small but were heavily scrutinized. The young man, however, had trained his mind for years. He had visualized challenges, he had faced doubt, ridicule, and isolation, and he had learned to control his thoughts under pressure. In every simulated crisis, he remained calm, analyzing, calculating, and acting with precision. This became his advantage, though he never allowed it to make him arrogant. Humility remained his companion, reminding him that the journey was far from over. Night exercises were the hardest. Exhausted from the day, he had to complete tasks in darkness, often in cold and wet conditions. Visibility was low, obstacles harder to detect, and mental fatigue set in. Many recruits failed, collapsing or making errors that cost them points. The young man, however, used these challenges as training in patience and strategy. He moved carefully, measured his actions, and kept his mind focused despite physical exhaustion. By the end of each night exercise, he found a quiet satisfaction in knowing he could endure more than he had ever imagined. Peer dynamics added another layer of challenge. Some recruits were hostile, suspicious of his abilities or dismissive of his quiet confidence. There were subtle attempts to undermine him, comments, challenges, tests of patience. He didn't respond with anger. Instead, he let his actions speak. When others saw his accuracy in shooting, his endurance in swimming, or his skill in obstacle courses, respect began to grow. Some rivals became allies, others silent observers, but all had to acknowledge that he was not just participating, he was excelling. Days blurred into weeks. Every routine, every drill, every small test was designed to strip away comfort, reveal weakness, and build strength. He learned to sleep in any position, to eat under stress, to perform while tired and hungry. His body and mind adapted, becoming instruments of skill and focus. The instructors, who at first seemed almost impossibly strict, began to treat him differently, not with favoritism, but with recognition of his potential. He had earned a place among those who might one day achieve greatness. One of the defining moments came during a final simulated combat exercise. Recruits were placed in a challenging environment, with limited resources, simulated enemies, and complex objectives. Many struggled with the coordination, stress, and physical demands. The young man, however, moved methodically, thinking several steps ahead. He coordinated with teammates, made calculated decisions, and executed every task with precision. By the end, his performance was unmatched. He had not only completed every objective, but he had done so with efficiency and skill that impressed the instructors and peers alike. That evening, as he rested, the young man reflected on how far he had come. The boy who had once been laughed at by the colonel had endured ridicule, doubt, and countless challenges to reach this point. Now he was among the most capable recruits in the program. The mockery that once stung so sharply had been transformed into motivation. He realized that every obstacle he had faced, every long hour, every moment of self-doubt, every instance of hardship, had prepared him for this world of excellence. The bond he formed with a few select peers also became a source of strength. They shared a quiet understanding, a recognition of the sacrifices each had made to be there. They pushed each other harder, celebrated each other's victories, and learned to trust one another implicitly. The young man realized that greatness wasn't achieved in isolation. The ability to work with others, to lead and support, to remain calm under pressure, was as vital as any physical skill. Through it all, he never lost sight of the dream that had started it all: to master his craft, to rise above expectation, and to prove that determination and talent could overcome prejudice and doubt. Every day in training reminded him of the boy he had once been, standing nervously at the edge of the range, mocked for daring to ask for a chance. He carried that memory like a quiet flame, not as a burden but as a source of strength. It reminded him why he trained, why he persevered, and why he would never give up. By the time the training program reached its most advanced stages, the young man had transformed. He was faster, stronger, more precise, and mentally sharper than he had ever been. He had faced fear, exhaustion, ridicule, and competition, and emerged not only unbroken but stronger. His instructors acknowledged his skill, often using him as an example of calm, focused excellence. And quietly in the back of his mind, he began to consider the next step, the moment when his skill, training, and determination would be tested against the very best. He knew that breaking records, achieving legendary status, and proving himself in the larger world would require even more. But he also knew that he had been forged by every challenge he had faced: the laughter of the colonel, the doubt of peers, the limitations of his early life. All of it had shaped him into someone capable of extraordinary achievement. He was no longer the boy who had asked politely for a chance to shoot. He was a young man on the path to greatness, ready to face challenges that few could endure, confident that every step forward was proof of his resilience and skill. As the sun set on another grueling day, he stood at the edge of the training grounds, tired but proud. The journey was far from over, but he had learned the value of patience, focus, and endurance. Every obstacle overcome was a testament to his determination. Every skill mastered a step closer to his ultimate goal. And deep inside he knew that one day, he would stand at the peak, not as someone seeking permission, but as someone whose accomplishments demanded recognition. The young man had arrived at the stage of his training where skill alone was no longer enough. He had endured grueling exercises, mastered every obstacle, and proven himself in countless drills. Now it was time to test himself against the very best, to see if his years of preparation could translate into extraordinary achievement. The final challenges were designed not just to measure competence, but to push every recruit beyond the limits of what they thought possible. The first test was marksmanship under extreme conditions. Recruits were required to hit moving targets at varying distances in changing weather while under time pressure. Many faltered, letting the stress of the moment cloud their focus. But the young man had spent years training for precisely this kind of situation. He controlled his breathing, visualized each shot, and allowed instinct to guide him. His bullets struck the targets with a precision that left instructors silent for a moment, the kind of stillness that meant true respect. Others watched, realizing that they were witnessing something remarkable. Word spread quickly among the trainees and instructors. The young man was no longer just another recruit. He was a force to be reckoned with. Some were impressed, some intimidated, and others inspired. He paid little attention to what others thought, focusing instead on each shot, each move, each challenge. For him, it was never about ego. It was about proving to himself more than anyone else that his skills, his discipline, and his determination could overcome any obstacle. Endurance tests came next, designed to exhaust recruits to their very limits. The young man found himself carrying heavy equipment through rough terrain, swimming in icy water, running for hours without pause. His muscles burned, his lungs ached, and his mind screamed for rest. Yet he pushed forward, drawing on every ounce of strength he had cultivated over the years. He remembered the lonely nights at the practice range, the moments of doubt, the ridicule he had faced. Every step, every stroke, every stride became a silent declaration. He would not be stopped. Physical endurance, however, was only part of the challenge. Mental endurance was what separated the truly elite from the rest. Recruits were subjected to high-pressure scenarios where decisions had to be made instantly, with incomplete information, and sometimes with teammates depending on them. The young man's mind, honed through years of preparation and focus, became his greatest weapon. He analyzed each situation calmly, made decisions with clarity, and acted decisively. Mistakes were rare, and when they occurred, he learned quickly and adjusted. One of the defining moments came during a multi-stage exercise that combined marksmanship, navigation, and physical endurance. Recruits had to navigate difficult terrain, hit multiple targets accurately, and complete the course within a strict time limit. Many failed under pressure, missing targets or slowing down due to exhaustion. The young man, however, moved with a quiet confidence. He calculated his pace, focused on each shot, and kept his mind sharp despite the physical strain. By the end of the exercise, he had completed the course faster and more accurately than anyone else. The instructors exchanged glances, a rare acknowledgement of awe at what he had achieved. Breaking records wasn't just about raw talent. It was about preparation, observation, and adaptation. The young man carefully watched his competitors, noting their strengths and weaknesses. He refined his own techniques in real time, adjusting to conditions and challenges that others struggled to manage. Every success was a result of deliberate effort, a combination of years of practice and the ability to think and react under pressure. The difference between him and the others was not luck, it was preparation meeting opportunity. As he continued to excel, the young man began to notice a change in the culture around him. Peers who had once doubted or ignored him now approached with respect. Instructors who had been strict observers began to acknowledge his skill openly. Even those who were competitive with him had to admit that he was exceptional. Yet he remained humble. Recognition was gratifying, but it was never the goal. The goal had always been mastery, and mastery required constant effort, not praise. The young man also found that success carried new challenges. With recognition came expectation. People watched him more closely, expecting him to succeed consistently, to perform perfectly, and to set the standard. Failure was no longer just personal. It became something that others noticed immediately, but he welcomed the challenge. Pressure had become a familiar companion, one he had learned to control and even use to sharpen his focus. The weight of expectation became motivation rather than a burden. One particularly difficult challenge was a series of shooting drills under extreme fatigue. Recruits had been running, swimming, and climbing for hours, their bodies exhausted, their hands shaking. Accuracy dropped for nearly everyone. The young man, however, remained precise. His years of training had taught him to control his body even when it screamed in protest. Each shot hit its mark, and when the exercise ended, the instructors were astonished. Not only had he completed the task successfully, but he had done so under conditions that would have caused most to fail. It was a moment that solidified his reputation as someone extraordinary, but it wasn't just skill and endurance that set him apart. It was mindset. The young man had learned to embrace challenges, to see obstacles as opportunities. Where others saw impossibility, he saw a test to overcome. Where others felt fear, he felt focus. Where others gave up under pressure, he pushed harder. This mindset became evident in every exercise, every drill, every moment when the stakes were highest. It wasn't arrogance. It was confidence rooted in preparation, discipline, and resilience. Throughout this period, he began to form a quiet bond with a few mentors and peers who recognized his potential. They shared strategies, offered encouragement, and helped refine his skills further. Yet the young man never relied on others to define his path. He learned from them, adapted their advice, and then executed on his own terms. Independence, combined with the ability to learn from others, became one of his greatest strengths. In one of the final competitions within the program, recruits were challenged to hit an almost impossible sequence of targets while moving through rough terrain. The difficulty level was extreme. Failure was common and success rare. The young man approached the challenge methodically. He calculated distance, adjusted for wind, maintained focus under exhaustion, and executed each shot with precision. When he finished, the targets were nearly all perfectly hit. The instructors, who rarely offered praise, nodded in recognition. Some simply shook their heads in disbelief. He had shattered the performance of every recruit before him. Word of his accomplishments spread quickly. The young man, once a boy dismissed as inexperienced and unworthy, had become a figure of respect within the training grounds. He had earned his place through relentless effort, focus, and skill. The journey that had begun with ridicule had transformed into one of triumph, a testament to what determination could achieve. Yet he remained grounded, knowing that there were still greater challenges ahead. Breaking records was one step. Continuing to grow, excel, and master his craft was a lifelong pursuit. He reflected often on the boy he had once been, standing nervously at the edge of the practice range, asking politely for a chance to shoot. The laughter of the colonel, which had once cut so sharply, now served as a quiet reminder of how far he had come. Every small victory along the way, every late night of practice, every moment of self-doubt that he had conquered had led to this moment. The past was no longer a source of shame. It was a foundation, a motivation, a proof that perseverance could overcome mockery and expectation. Despite his success, he never stopped training. Even as he broke records and earned respect, he continued to push himself harder. He refined his techniques, studied strategies, and sought out new challenges. The pursuit of excellence became a habit, a way of life. Victory was not a destination. It was a momentary recognition on the path to even greater achievement. This mindset ensured that his talent did not stagnate but continued to grow, expanding with every new test, every new obstacle, every new skill mastered. By the end of this phase of his journey, the young man had achieved something extraordinary. He had risen from a boy dismissed by a mocking colonel to a record-breaking, highly respected recruit, capable of feats that others thought impossible. He had mastered not just physical skills but mental resilience, focus, and the ability to excel under pressure. He had proven to himself and to the world that talent combined with determination, preparation, and discipline could overcome doubt, ridicule, and expectation. And yet he knew this was only the beginning. The records he had broken were impressive, but his ultimate goal, becoming one of the elite, a true master of his craft, still lay ahead. The lessons learned, the skills honed, and the victories achieved would all serve as preparation for the challenges to come. He had proven he could rise above, and now he was ready to aim even higher, to test himself against limits that most could not imagine, and to inspire others who once felt overlooked or underestimated. The young man had come far beyond what he had imagined as a boy, standing nervously at the edge of a shooting range. The memories of the colonel's mocking laughter, the doubt of peers, and the obstacles of his early life were no longer burdens. They were reminders of what he had overcome. He had proven himself through years of preparation, grueling training, and extraordinary focus. Now he stood at the peak of his achievements, respected, admired, and accomplished in ways few could ever claim. But accomplishment alone was not enough. He had learned that greatness was not just about breaking records or earning accolades. It was about responsibility, about inspiring those who came after, about showing others that determination, discipline, and perseverance could triumph over prejudice and doubt. He remembered his own journey, the boy who had been laughed at, who had been underestimated, who had fought for every small victory. That boy's struggle became the foundation for his purpose now, to guide, to encourage, to lead. He began mentoring young recruits, some of them hesitant, some of them full of raw talent but unsure of how to harness it. He spoke to them with patience, not authority, sharing lessons from his own experience. "Focus on what you can control," he would say. "Prepare every day. Don't worry about who doubts you or laughs at you. Your actions, not their opinions, define your path." The young recruits listened, inspired by someone who had been where they were and had risen above it. His mentorship was not just about skill, it was about mindset, about building confidence and resilience. Even outside of formal training, he became a figure of inspiration. Communities that once doubted the potential of young people like him began to recognize the possibilities that determination and hard work could create. He spoke at schools, community centers, and events, telling his story not as a boast, but as proof that perseverance mattered. Children and teenagers, especially,